All right, so we're down to the last part now, and now we're going to discuss what makes people violent and what are the causes of violence. Okay, we can see two very different scenarios in the photos here. So an expressive, a person may respond disproportionately to mislabeled provocations. They may have difficulty with problem-solving skills and therefore lash out. These are emotional outbursts, can also be fear, so attack before you are attacked, jealousy, or some kind of emotional outburst, as I said. One of the cases, and you can see a little bit more about it in the video if you are not familiar with it, is the case of Lisa Harnham, who was thrown off the 12th floor of an apartment building in Sydney about 2011, I think that happened. She was Canadian, and the fellow that did it was charged with her murder, and he's currently in prison. Another case is the backpacker stabbing that happened at Home Hill in North Queensland a year or so ago. A 21-year-old tourist was killed by a Frenchman, and he was jealous or something like that. And then an Englishman who came to her aid was also killed when he tried to stop what was happening. That Frenchman has since been found to be of unsound mind, and it's not clear whether he will be deported back to France or stay here, but he was a backpacker as well. So these are emotional and expressive attacks. In the heat of the moment, nobody's thinking beforehand. Think about rational choice theory. There's no weighing up the benefits over the costs here. It's just lash out. Instrumental, on the other hand, these abusers are said to be inherently narcissistic. So they're happy to exploit or even kill others for their personal gain. And that's for their own personal gain. They're using the killing to get money. Improving your social position can happen in a gang where you are trying to improve your status. So that's another reason that you might participate in some sort of violence, but it's all for your own benefit. Okay, so expressive and instrumental. Think about those now in relation to the Washington sniper killers and which way do you think they were going. So we have this little wheel. This took me ages to do because I couldn't copy and paste it. So you just get the headings on the following slides because it was going to take me forever to try and do this again. My great technology skills. But we have here 6 different reasons that are the causes of people committing violence. So let's go through those one at a time. And the first one we're going to talk about is personal traits and makeup. All right. Gottfredson and Hershey, who are 2 researchers, describe this as a lack of self-control. So you can be angry and get angry really, really quickly and lack self-control not to act out in a certain way. So very impulsive and act before thinking. Intellectual functioning can be less about IQ and more about the level of education that you have reached. For mental health, so CD, ODD, ASPD, they stand for conduct disorder, oppositional defiance disorder, and antisocial personality disorder. And I've got a couple of other psychotic and major affective disorders here as well. So let's go through those. Conduct disorder. This is a repetitive and persistent pattern of behaviour in which the basic rights of others or major age-appropriate norms are violated. Very antisocial. If you have a child with conduct disorder or oppositional defiant disorder, you're really up against it because these can't be fixed, as it were. These children have these things, it's just part of their makeup. The way it's treated is by teaching the children how to control it themselves, which is really, really difficult when you're talking about small children. Oppositional defiance disorder, constant irritability and characterised by constant disobedience and hostility, aggression and vindictiveness. Cannot be fully treated and is a lifelong condition. Thought to be brought about by genetic and environmental factors. So very, very difficult to treat and very, very difficult children to raise. Antisocial personality disorder is a child who totally disregards and violates the rights of those around them. They'll have a history of manipulative and exploitative behaviour, and they will lack regard for their own safety or that of others. So they're the really three big ones that you're going to get in children that can lead them to become violent. Psychotically, we're talking about cerebral atrophy, so the loss of neurons in the cerebral cortex, which is the largest part of our brain, and the connections between them. So this is the frontal lobe area of the brain. This is your reasoning and planning and ability to make good decisions and problem solve. And that's all located in that frontal lobe and is really the last to fully develop. So you have all your neurons when you're born. So when you lose them, they don't come back. They've found that there is a high level of brain injuries in murderers, but the correlation could be that they are more likely to have a brain injury, or because that they are more involved in violent crime, they are more likely to get a brain injury. And sorry, that goes down the bottom. This was neurological that I was talking about. Okay, so psychotic and major affective disorders do increase the risk of violence. Cerebral atrophy and brain injury is what I was just discussing there. So if we look at this case study in 1996, 35 people died and over 20 more were injured in one incident that happened at various locations at Port Arthur. If we look at the past of the offender, he has an IQ of 66. That is really, really low. In the old way of describing it that we don't use anymore, that would be said to be retarded. So that was how they came up with that description. He did not complete high school and was put on a disability pension at around 16 years of age. Had to see a psychiatrist to get the pension, and this was what the psychiatrist found. And this was about 15 years before the shooting. So this could help us when we're looking at risk factors of why these things sometimes happen. But this was what the psychiatrist wrote. Cannot read or write, does a bit of gardening and watches TV. Only his parents' efforts prevent further deterioration. Could be schizophrenic, and parents face a bleak future with him. That was what was written about him at 16. Okay, so if we look at this, we can see that offenders quite often have impairments, but we also see the above. These murderers were given the MMPI personality test, so many of them had problems, but the scary part is that just over a quarter of them were quite normal. So this is quite a big chunk of men who had absolutely nothing wrong with them at all. And if you look at the psychotics, that was quite small, and psychopaths was 17%. Nearly half were hypersensitive aggressive, but over a quarter had nothing wrong with them. So the psychotic killers had lost total touch with reality. They were delusional, hearing and seeing things, and these were very bizarre types of crimes. Psychopaths, they're the ones that just don't care about anybody else. They have no ability to feel sympathy or empathy for the feelings of others. And that was Ted Bundy, and yet the girls all thought they were going to save him and change him, and you can't. People like that, that's the way they're wired. Okay, evolutionary factors and human instinct. Is it human instinct to be violent? Is it within all of us to be violent? Is Freud fixated on the oral stage due to smoking his cigar? You'll learn more about the oral stage when you do psychology. So Freud had these two theories about the eros and thanatos instincts. So eros is the god of love and sexual attraction. Freud suggested that eros was responsible for sustaining the life of the individual as well as continuing the species. So it was all about, this is all about what makes us happy in life. But with the thanatos or death instinct, Freud suggested that everyone has an unconscious desire to die. So the goal of all life is death. And let's face it, you are dying from the day you are born. You are moving towards death. Just how long you will be here is what's the unknown content. So life largely tempers this wish, but those who kill others are expressing self-destructive behaviour created by the death instinct. And Freud said that we all have this life and death instincts within us. Evolutionary theory is more about the instincts that were acceptable in the past, say in Africa 100,000 years ago, but are not acceptable now. But some can't stop themselves from doing it, as it is instinctual. And this is why they say that it is men that are predominantly violent, because back then it would have been men who were predominantly violent too. Evolutionary theory is quite often used to explain rape, as it states that men in the caveman era, 100,000 years ago, hunter-gatherers, would try to get women pregnant to ensure that their genetic line was continued. And if women who were of childbearing age didn't want to be with them, because let's face it, women are not always invested in just being pregnant all the time, then they would be forcibly raped. So evolutionary theory, in a lot more depth than that, is quite often used to explain rape. Substance abuse. Alcohol and drugs play a huge part in violence. It is the effect of the substance on you as a person, and it affects people differently. You can have people who are happy drunks, and then you've got people who can be really, really aggressive, horrible drunks, and drugs is the same. Some drugs, more than others, though, are more likely to induce violence. So people who are addicted to drugs are going to need more and more money to get more and more drugs to get the same level of hit. So that can lead to violence. There is a systemic link. Gang violence can be linked to substance abuse when they fight over turf. They may come to an agreement about where each is going to sell their drugs, but violence will erupt if they go onto the turf of another. Okay, I'll just give you a sec to finish reading those statistics. Socialisation and upbringing. Your family has a huge influence on how you act. So kids who grow up in households where parents are criminal or absent or inconsistent in their discipline or don't supervise their kids can lead to a child becoming violent. Okay. If you just look at the photo, which is something that possibly is not going to happen in Australia, Dad's carrying a sidearm. He's got something in his back pocket there. He's got a rifle of some description. The little bloke's got a toy gun of some description, and he's reaching out to the rifle. So the way that child grows up is that weapon use will be normalised in his behaviour. If mum or dad are violent, then it's going to reinforce that behaviour to that child. And he's just he's cute as a button. But your socialising and upbringing has a really, really big effect on how you turn out. Very high rates of murderers report being physically abused as children. But it is really important that we remember that not all who grow up in abusive atmospheres will go on to be violent. Many don't. Many break the cycle by saying they would never ever do to their children what was done to them. Some of them say that and go on to do it anyway. Many juvenile offenders have been executed in the US, although they were all in their late 20s or early 30s when executed. If you actually want to have a look at some stories of young people who've either been executed or who are on death row or who have had life sentences imposed upon them when they were 14 or 15, then go onto YouTube and have a look. There's lots of documentaries there. But the comment there by Lansford et al. Is really important. Physical abuse during the first 5 years of life increased the likelihood of violent delinquency during adolescence. It's a well-known fact that children do most of their learning in response to manners and the way they treat other people during the first 7 years of life. So you've got to get them quickly. Okay, let's move on to exposure to violence. This is a really really debated thing about children watching a lot of violence. So exposure is about seeing or observing violence, and you can develop PTSD from growing up in a violent household. Or you become really desensitized to it and believe that violence is the norm. If you've never experienced it or seen it, you would be quite distressed if you saw it. The link between media exposure to violence is tenuous at best. Don't forget that by the age of 18, you've probably already seen nearly 20,000 acts of violence and murder. So how do they actually measure whether it has an effect or not? So they get groups in laboratories. Half the people will watch something terrifying like Freddy Krueger, which is the bottom photo there. If you haven't ever heard of Freddy Krueger, Google it, they're horror movies. And the other half of the group will watch something really, really bland, like a rom-com. And then they'll get someone to come in and act aggressively towards the groups once they finish watching the movie. Those who watch Freddy will probably react or will react more aggressively than those who watch the rom-com. But this only happens in the lab. So the link is there, but it's not definitive as to whether the cause and effect is violence and media or whether there are other variables involved, such as upbringing. So we have the situation at the moment where video games, such as the photo you can see in the top there, where they're, frighteningly real in their violence with blood and guts. Kids are playing those types of games all the time, but they're about to take the weapons off Yosemite Sam and Elmer Fudd, I think it is. But two Bugs Bunny characters that are cowboys that carry guns, they're going to take the guns away from them in all of the cartoons, but kids can still play these videos with lots of blood and guts. So I find it a little bit confusing, amusing that this is what's going on out there in the world. I think we've got bigger things to worry about at the moment. Okay. Intimate partner violence. A substantial amount is observed by children. About half of all IPV violence and incidents are observed by children. If they see this, they are more likely to grow up thinking it is okay and possibly doing it themselves. And it is now exposing children to intimate partner violence is now being recognised as a form of child abuse. I would really recommend you watch this YouTube clip. It's a TV commercial, so it's not very long, but it just displays this perfectly, and it's Australian, it's Victorian, done before COVID, obviously. So yes, intergenerational transmission of violence. We have discussed this before. So watch the video. Okay, cultural values and subculture of violence. I think this is the last one. Subculture is a culture within subculture is a culture within a culture. So gangs in prison or on the street, or good ones like college students and university students can also be a little subculture. Decker's research shows that violence is a way for new members to show that they are tough or for retaliation. So it could be about the culture of the group of people you spend time with. What are their beliefs? What are their values? Okay, so they're saying here that subcultural values and a subculture of violence is likely to lead to people trying to prove themselves and show off, and it is used also for retaliation. Alrighty. That ends part 3, and that's the last of the mini lectures for this week. Now, I want you to watch the video below. It goes for about 3 minutes. It's really interesting. I'm not going to tell you anything about it because I want you to watch it, but it's a little bit teary. So just have a look, and we'll talk on Monday. See you guys.